In the vast constellation of Hollywood studios, few carry a legacy as layered and transformative as Sony Pictures Entertainment. It is not merely a production company. It is a bridge between eras, cultures, and technologies. From the scrappy underdog days of classic Hollywood to the high-stakes global franchise wars of the 21st century, Sony's story is one of reinvention under pressure and ambition without borders. Long before the Sony name illuminated theater marquees, the studio operated as Columbia Pictures, a company that clawed its way into relevance during Hollywood's golden age. Unlike the glamorous giants of its time, Columbia built its empire through efficiency, bold creative bets, and strategic partnerships. It wasn't the biggest studio in town, but it was one of the smartest. Then came 1989, a moment that reshaped the entertainment industry. When Sony Group Corporation acquired Columbia, it signaled something unprecedented, a technology titan stepping directly into Hollywood filmmaking. The move raised eyebrows, sparked debate, and foreshadowed the future, a future where content and technology will become inseparable forces. Today, Sony Pictures stands at the crossroads of global entertainment. It competes in the superhero arena, challenges animation norms, curates prestige cinema, and navigates a streaming-dominated marketplace, all while operating under the umbrella of one of the world's largest tech conglomerates. This is not just the story of a studio. It is the story of globalization in Hollywood, of risk and recovery, of intellectual property battles, cultural shifts, and cinematic breakthroughs. Welcome to Cinema Uncovered, and this is the evolution of Sony Pictures Entertainment. Long before the sleek corporate identity of Sony Pictures Entertainment, there was Columbia Pictures, a studio that began not as royalty, but as a survivor. Founded in 1924 by brothers Harry and Jack Cohn along with Joe Brandt, Columbia wasn't built on vast backlots or elite star contracts. It started as a modest operation known for producing low-budget features and short films. In an era dominated by industry titans like Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and Paramount Pictures, Columbia was often considered a poverty row studio, smaller, leaner, and constantly fighting for relevance. But what Columbia lacked in size, it made up for an instinct. The studio's fortunes changed dramatically through its collaboration with visionary director Frank Capra. During the 1930s, Capra delivered a string of defining classics, including It Happened One Night, which became the first film to win all 5 major Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay. Suddenly, Columbia was no longer just competing. It was leading. Capra's humanistic storytelling gave the studio a signature identity. Films about ordinary individuals standing up against powerful systems. This theme would echo through Columbia's productions for decades. Through the 1940s and 1950s, Columbia expanded its slate, producing film noir, screwball comedies, and historical epics. The studio also became known for discovering and nurturing talent rather than relying solely on long-term contracts, a flexible strategy that allowed it to adapt as Hollywood's rigid studio system began to weaken. However, the post-war era brought new challenges. The decline of the studio system, the rise of television, and shifting audience tastes forced Columbia to evolve once again. By the 1970s and 1980s, the studio had experienced cycles of both creative highs and financial instability. Yet even during uncertain periods, Columbia delivered major hits, from character-driven dramas to mainstream crowd pleasers. The studio's survival through decades of industry upheaval proved one thing: Columbia wasn't built on excess, it was built on resilience. And that resilience would soon prepare for the most dramatic transformation in its history, a transformation that would change not only the studio's name, but its place in the global entertainment hierarchy. By the late 1980s, Columbia Pictures had survived decades of Hollywood upheaval, but it was no longer the dominant creative force it once aspired to be. The studio needed stability, investment, and a bold new direction. What it got instead was a revolution. In 1989, Sony Group Corporation made a move that stunned the entertainment world. It acquired Columbia Pictures Entertainment for $3.4 billion. At the time, the idea of a Japanese electronics giant owning a major Hollywood studio ignited intense debate. Some viewed it as a symbol of globalization. Others saw it as a cultural power shift. But beneath the headlines was a strategic vision. Sony understood that hardware and content were destined to converge. The acquisition formed what would become Sony Pictures Entertainment. Suddenly, the studio was backed by one of the most powerful technology companies in the world, the same corporation behind the Walkman, consumer televisions, and emerging digital innovation. Sony wasn't just buying movies, it was investing in intellectual property that could drive future media ecosystems. The early years under Sony ownership were turbulent. Executive shakeups, high-profile hirings, and expensive productions defined the 1990s transition period. Sony recruited industry heavyweights like Peter Guber and John Peters to revitalize the studio's output, but not every gamble paid off. Cost overruns and mixed box office results led critics to question whether Sony truly understood Hollywood's creative machinery. Yet over time, the strategy began to crystallize. Sony positioned the studio to compete aggressively in mainstream entertainment while maintaining flexibility across genres. It strengthened distribution pipelines, modernized production operations, and leaned into global marketing, an advantage few traditional studios had mastered at the time. The 1990s also saw the rise of franchise thinking, and Sony was ready to play the long game. Instead of relying solely on one-off hits, the studio began investing in properties that could expand into sequels, merchandising, and international markets. More importantly, Sony's ownership symbolized a new era in Hollywood, one where filmmaking was no longer just an American industry, but a global enterprise. Technology, corporate strategy, and storytelling were now intertwined. The transformation wasn't instant, but by the turn of the millennium, Sony Pictures Entertainment had evolved from a struggling legacy studio into a globally integrated entertainment powerhouse, setting the stage for the blockbuster era that would define its next chapter. As the new millennium began, Sony Pictures Entertainment entered its most commercially explosive era yet. The strategy was clear: build franchises, dominate the global box office, and compete head-to-head with Hollywood's biggest players. The turning point came in 2002 with Spider-Man, directed by Sam Raimi and starring Tobey Maguire. At a time when superhero films were still considered risky investments, Sony delivered a cultural phenomenon. The film shattered opening weekend records and proved that comic book adaptations could be emotionally grounded, commercially massive, and globally resonant. The success of Spider-Man and its sequels didn't just boost Sony's finances. It helped launch the modern superhero era. Years before cinematic universes became standard industry strategy, Sony demonstrated the power of serialized storytelling built around beloved intellectual property. But Spider-Man wasn't the studio's only franchise engine. The late 1990s had already introduced audiences to Men in Black, starring Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. The sci-fi action comedy blended sharp humor with blockbuster spectacle, spawning sequels and cementing Sony's ability to create globally appealing brands. In 2006, Sony launched another high-octane series with Casino Royale, revitalizing the James Bond franchise under its Columbia banner and introducing Daniel Craig as 007. The gritty reinvention of Bond aligned perfectly with the studio's evolving blockbuster identity, grounded, intense, and commercially ambitious. Then came reinvention. In 2012, Sony rebooted its crown jewel with The Amazing Spider-Man, starring Andrew Garfield. While the results were mixed, the move demonstrated Sony's commitment to maintaining control of its most valuable property. Eventually, in a landmark partnership, Sony collaborated with Marvel Studios to integrate Spider-Man into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, beginning with Spider-Man: Homecoming starring Tom Holland. The deal was unprecedented, a shared custody arrangement over one of the most profitable characters in pop culture history. Beyond superheroes and spies, Sony also found surprise gold in legacy revival. Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle became an unexpected mega-hit, proving the studio's ability to modernize nostalgic properties for new audiences. By the 2010s, Sony had fully embraced the franchise model, but with a twist. Unlike competitors building singular cinematic universes, Sony diversified. Action, comedy, animation, prestige, drama. The studio refused to be defined by one genre. This era solidified Sony Pictures as a resilient competitor in an increasingly consolidated Hollywood. It wasn't always the biggest studio, but consistently proved it could play in the same arena, delivering global hits powered by strategy, adaptability, and bold creative gambles. While franchises fueled global box office dominance, Sony Pictures Entertainment quietly began redefining another battlefield: animation and prestige cinema. This chapter wasn't about simply competing. It was about differentiating. In 2002, the studio launched Sony Pictures Animation, stepping into a space largely dominated by giants like Pixar and DreamWorks. Early hits like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs showcased the studio's comedic instincts and technical ambition. But Sony Animation's true revolution arrived in 2018. With Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, Sony didn't just release another superhero film. It changed the visual language of mainstream animation. The film embraced a bold comic book aesthetic, layered frame rates, stylized textures, and emotional storytelling centered on Miles Morales. It was daring, kinetic, and unlike anything audiences had seen before. The film won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, breaking a long-standing dominance in the category and elevating Sony as an artistic risk-taker. Its sequel, Spider-Man, Across the Spider-Verse, expanded the multiverse concept into an even more visually experimental epic. The Spider-Verse films proved that Sony could lead not only commercially but creatively, influencing the entire animation industry in the process. At the same time, Sony strengthened its foothold in prestige filmmaking through Sony Pictures Classics. Unlike the blockbuster-focused divisions, Sony Pictures Classics specialized in independent and international cinema, acquiring and distributing films that often became award season contenders. Through this division, Sony supported carefully crafted dramas and literary adaptations that balanced commercial appeal with artistic depth. The studio demonstrated it could exist in two worlds simultaneously: the multiplex spectacle and the art house theater. This dual strategy became one of Sony's greatest strengths. While other studios poured resources into singular cinematic universes or streaming empires, Sony diversified its identity. It could deliver animated innovation, grounded dramas, crowd-pleasing comedies, and franchise tentpoles, all under one corporate banner. This chapter reveals a studio that refused to be boxed into one lane. Instead of chasing trends, Sony often redefined them, blending technology, artistry, and calculated risk into a creative renaissance that strengthened its long-term legacy. Success in Hollywood is rarely a straight line. And for Sony Pictures Entertainment, the mid-2010s brought one of the most unprecedented crises in modern studio history. In 2014, ahead of the release of The Interview, a political satire starring Seth Rogen and James Franco, Sony became the target of a massive cyberattack. Confidential emails, unreleased films, and internal documents were leaked online. The incident made global headlines, raising urgent questions about cybersecurity, corporate vulnerability, and the intersection of geopolitics and entertainment. The studio faced threats, canceled the film's wide theatrical release temporarily, and navigated intense public scrutiny. For a moment, it seemed as though the crisis could permanently damage Sony's reputation. But instead of retreating, the company adapted. The Interview was ultimately released through a limited theatrical run and digital platforms, an early example of alternative distribution strategies that would later become common across the industry. The hack was more than a scandal. It was a wake-up call. Hollywood was no longer insulated from global political tensions or digital warfare. Studios had become multinational entities operating in a highly connected and highly vulnerable world. At the same time, another transformation was unfolding: the rise of streaming. While competitors like Netflix and Disney Plus were investing heavily in proprietary platforms, Sony made a different strategic choice. Rather than launching a major standalone streaming service, Sony positioned itself as a powerful content supplier. This licensing-focused strategy allowed Sony to generate consistent revenue without bearing the massive infrastructure costs of running a global streaming platform. High-profile output deals ensured that Sony films would have premium digital homes after theatrical runs, keeping the studio agile in an increasingly fragmented marketplace. Meanwhile, Sony continued to expand its Spider-Man universe with spin-offs like Venom, doubling down on character-driven franchises while maintaining strategic collaborations with Marvel Studios. This chapter reveals a defining truth about Sony Pictures: survival through adaptation. Whether facing cyberattacks, political controversy, or the collapse of traditional distribution models, the studio repeatedly recalibrated rather than collapsed. In an era where many legacy institutions struggled to navigate digital disruption, Sony leaned into flexibility. It embraced partnerships over isolation, licensing over overextension, and resilience over retreat, proving that sometimes longevity isn't about dominating every trend, but about choosing the right battles to fight. As we trace the arc of Sony Pictures Entertainment from its modest beginnings as Columbia Pictures to its status as a global media powerhouse, one truth becomes clear. Sony's legacy is defined by reinvention. Few studios have balanced the pressures of blockbuster dominance, creative risk, and technological innovation as consistently. Sony's influence is evident across multiple dimensions of modern filmmaking. Its franchises, from Spider-Man to Jumanji, have shaped the expectations of global audiences, blending spectacle with accessibility. Through Sony Pictures Animation, it has pushed the boundaries of visual storytelling, redefining what animated cinema can achieve both artistically and commercially. Meanwhile, Sony Pictures Classics has ensured that the studio remains a patron of independent and foreign cinema, contributing to award-season narratives and artistic discourse. Beyond individual films, Sony's corporate approach, embracing globalization, technological synergy, and strategic partnerships, has influenced how studios operate in the 21st century. Its collaborations with Marvel Studios, licensing strategies in the streaming era, and careful franchise stewardship demonstrate a nimbleness rare among Hollywood legacy studios. Equally important is Sony's cultural footprint. From iconic Golden Age classics to contemporary superhero epics, the studio has consistently delivered stories that resonate across generations. Its work has launched careers, introduced beloved characters, and inspired countless filmmakers worldwide. In doing so, Sony has not only entertained audiences, but also helped define what it means to be a modern studio: ambitious, versatile, and unafraid to evolve. As the industry continues to change, with AI, streaming, and global audiences reshaping filmmaking, Sony Pictures Entertainment's legacy endures. It is a story of survival, innovation, and vision, proving that longevity in Hollywood is less about dominating a single era and more about continuously reinventing yourself for the next one. In the annals of cinema history, Sony stands as a bridge between eras, a studio rooted in tradition but always looking forward, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling, technology, and creative ambition. Fun facts: historic home. Sony Pictures Entertainment is headquartered on the iconic Culver Studios, lot being owned by Japanese conglomerate Sony Group Corporation. The studio operates largely independently, maintaining its distinctly Hollywood identity. First animated Oscar win, Spider-Man. Into the Spider-Verse was the first non-Disney or Pixar animated film in years to win the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, signaling a shift in the animation industry. Streaming strategy. Unlike many competitors, Sony has never launched a massive standalone streaming platform. Instead, it licenses its content to platforms like Netflix and Disney+, leveraging its IP without the infrastructure overhead. Spider-Man partnership. Sony retains the film rights to Spider-Man, which led to an unprecedented partnership with Marvel Studios to integrate the character into the Marvel Cinematic Universe while maintaining control over standalone Spider-Man projects. Technological innovation. Sony has consistently leveraged its parent company's technological expertise, from early digital sound innovations to advanced animation techniques, giving the studio a technical edge in filmmaking. Diverse output. Beyond blockbusters, Sony Pictures Classics has distributed multiple Academy Award-winning films, including Call Me by Your Name and Whiplash, demonstrating the studio's balance of commercial and critical success. Legacy revivals. Sony has a history of revitalizing dormant properties, such as the Jumanji franchise, turning older films into modern global hits. Cybersecurity milestone. The 2014 hack surrounding the interview became one of the most infamous cybersecurity incidents in entertainment history, influencing how studios approach digital security today. Global influence. Sony Pictures operates as a model of globalization in Hollywood, blending Japanese corporate ownership with American filmmaking, showing that cinema can be both culturally distinct and internationally marketable. From its humble beginnings as Columbia Pictures to its transformation under Sony Group Corporation conglomerate, Sony Pictures Entertainment has carved a unique path in Hollywood history. It is a studio defined by reinvention, a company that has survived industry upheavals, technological revolutions, cyber crises, and shifting audience expectations, all while producing films that have left an indelible mark on global culture. Sony's story is more than box office numbers or awards. It is a narrative of resilience, creativity, and strategic vision. From groundbreaking animation and blockbuster franchises to prestige dramas and independent gems, the studio has consistently demonstrated an ability to balance artistry with commerce. As the entertainment landscape continues to evolve, with streaming platforms, technological innovation, and global audiences reshaping filmmaking, Sony Pictures remains a studio capable of adapting and thriving. Its legacy is not just in the films it produces, but an enduring influence it exerts on the art, business, and culture cinema. This has been Cinema Uncovered. The story of Sony Pictures Entertainment reminds us that in Hollywood, survival is an art form, reinvention is a strategy, and storytelling, above all, is timeless.